Creepypastas are internet horror stories designed to frighten readers by trying to convince them that the story is true. Many creepypastas are centered around the experiments that took place during and after World War II by various world leaders. Most infamously, the Nazi experimentation on Jewish prisoners in concentration camps led to some sickening procedures, most of which are lost now. However, stories about experiments that did exist run around. Tonight, we're going to see the worst mankind has to offer, as I count down the most frightening experiment creepypastas.
Senses. In October 2000, a group of Ukraine scientists performed an experiment involving the human mind and its senses. They wanted to see if the human brain could sense death whether by witnessing it or being surrounded by the feeling of loss. Certain subjects were chosen to test out other senses. One subject was used to determine the sense of death. So he was strapped onto a chair with sensors attached to his head, which was attached to a monitor to monitor his brainwave activities. The subject witnessed numerous rats being killed in many gruesome ways, including dropping them into acid or burning them alive. Finally, one of the scientists walked in with a handgun and shot him. Interestingly enough, during the 3 minutes he was bleeding out, there were no brain activity, as if the brain sensed death and immediately turned itself off.
Blood freezing experiment. In 1944, the British Secret Intelligence Service tried developing a chemical that would modify the blood's properties and structure, so that if one were to be shot or cut, the blood would freeze and block the wound. This would stop bleeding and help improve the person's well-being. 3 subjects were chosen, all male and all over 21 years of age. Once the chemical was introduced into their bloodstream, they must be monitored for 24 hours. By the first hour, Subject 1 and Subject 3 were screaming, but this stopped after hour 3. By hour 25, subjects can be given painkillers and meals, but must continue to be monitored until hour 72. By then, the subjects must be restrained. The left arm is to be cut open, and the right arm is to be shot to observe results. All 3 subjects had this dark, amorphous substance, solidifying the wound very quickly. After some time, they began to look paler, their skin was thickening, and their eyes were bloodshot. The subjects showed inhumane strength as they attacked the researchers. When MI5 agents entered to neutralize the room, the subjects were reported to be missing. Research for this project was discontinued. All further evidence was classified as SIS top secret. The Chernobyl experiment. A research team was assigned to inspect the radiated area of Chernobyl. As they were approaching it, the helicopter's motor gave out and crash landed onto Chernobyl. The team survived, but the pilots are dead. 3 days pass without any help from the headquarters, and the team begins to hear strange sounds. Some of the team members begin to go insane, swearing that they've seen a young boy with no arms or eyes walking around. Mutated creatures start to appear, many looking like disfigured women and children. 25 years after the radiation spill, Chernobyl is still under restrictions in the production, transportation, and consumption of food. Infections are decreasing.
Fear hormone. The story is transcribed from German documents found by American soldiers during the aftermath of World War II. The document details 2 men who were sentenced to death but instead were chosen to be part of an experiment involving fear hormones and weapons for war. The 2 subjects, Subject A and Subject B, were given a table with 2 chairs, a cot, and a mattress, a stocked bookcase, a notepad and pen, and a bathroom area. When humans are in fear of something, their brains release a certain chemical, so the German scientists developed a gas-based version of the same chemical. Neither of the subjects were aware of the gas being let into the room. Subject A became more and more unstable and aggressive. He wouldn't eat or read. Subject B stared at one of the chairs as if making eye contact with somebody sitting on the chair, but nobody was there. The documents don't say much afterwards. The American soldiers found a note saying, "They are dead. Every one of them. I hear in the walls. I hear him whispering to me, 'Yes, yes, please come and take me away. I want no more of that.'" As the note ends there, the rest too soaked in blood to read. In April 23, 1944, Allied soldiers found the German laboratory where these experiments took place. Approximately 13 dead bodies were found. Most bodies were shattered into pieces, in one case ripped straight in half. Of the 13 bodies, 12 had matching lab coats. The other body was presumably Subject A, and Subject B was presumed dead.
The Gansfield experiment. The Gansfield experiment was used as a technique to test people for ESP, extrasensory perception. The point of the experiment was to reduce normal sensory input and allow one's size signals to come through. This is done by taping half ping pong balls over the subject's eyes and having red lights shown over them. Then place headphones in their ears and play white or static noise. This would continue for 30 minutes or until the subject begins to hallucinate. However, not everyone is in the right state of mind to successfully perform the experiment. Some even claim to be tortured throughout the whole experience. Others claim to see random numbers form into shapes, hear footsteps, feel the room they're in spinning, and feel muscle spasms. But some claim they don't feel anything at all. Gateway of the Mind. In 1983, a team of scientists theorized that one could perceive the presence of God if he had no access to his senses. The scientists performed complex operations on a man, removing every sensory nerve that connected to his brain. With no possible way to communicate or even sense the outside world, he was alone, with only his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. Days later, the man cried that he could hear the voices of his dead wife. He could even communicate back. He could even name deceased relatives of the scientist and reveal personal information about them. Soon the voices inside of his head began to overwhelm him. His consciousness was bombarded with hundreds of voices from the deceased, some telling him about the horrors of hell or even the end of the world. The subject began torturing himself, clawing out his own eyes. He was on the verge of killing himself when the scientists rushed in to try and stop him. However, despite being blind, the subject turned his head. He looked directly at one of the scientists and said, "I have spoken with God, and He has abandoned us." His vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death.
Tulpa. A man spent 6 months participating in a psychological experiment where he would stay alone in a room and imagine a double of himself, called Tulpa, while still having sensors attached to his head that read his brain activities. It was difficult at first, but the man was eventually able to keep his imaginary friend present long enough without any distractions. Outside of the experiment, he'd imagine his Tulpa breakdancing or juggling or whatever entertained him. He even began communicating with his Tulpa, and the Tulpa responded back. The researchers encouraged this, explaining that the Tulpa can access his subconscious. The Tulpa could paraphrase quotes from books he once read, access all sorts of memories and information he'd forgotten. It was a walking repository of everything and anything he'd knew and forgotten. At this point, the researchers asked if he could stop visualizing his tulpa, to which he denied, and the researchers seemed pleased. As days went on, the tulpa began to influence his actions and emotions. The man tried to stop visualizing him, but couldn't. The tulpa would always come back, more menacing, taller, more angry at his creator for trying to abandon him. The tulpa could touch him. He could even hurt him. The tulpa told stories of how he was going to kill everyone the man loved, starting with his sister. Then he smiled and said, "All thoughts are creative," before walking out the door.
The Harbinger Experiment. The Harbinger Experiment was done by an unnamed professor who wanted to find proof of the metaphysical, a world that we simply cannot see. The professor believed that he would be able to open up a portal between said worlds, allowing 3 separate entities to cross over into our own. 3 subjects were chosen as hosts for these spirits to latch onto. The subjects had no family, no friends, so nobody would have missed them if something had gone wrong. They were confined to 3 separate rooms, and as the professor started chanting through the microphone, the ground began to shake, the air began to feel heavy, and the sense of dread surrounded the subjects. One subject even started screaming, and her dead corpse was found less than a minute later with a look of fear frozen on her face. The other subjects became this gruesome horde figure with a contorted face, killing off the security guards and with some of the 15 staff members. Only one survived, and to this day he proclaims that his story is true. And it wasn't meant for some cheap thrill, and he prayed that the reader would never experience the truth.
Kagome. Nazi scientists near the end of World War II performed experiments with the goal of giving man the power of immortality. They believe that the brain is on a certain predetermined timer that, when set off during mid-age, begins to count down our final moments. Like how butterflies can live only for a day, but other insects can live much longer. By removing this timer, they can grant the mind immortality, therefore making the person immortal. The scientists were sent to Japan to perform these experiments. They demanded the subjects to be children, orphans, since their timer hasn't started yet and they, assumingly, had nothing left to live for. Various procedures were done. Not all the subjects survived. The children who did survive began to act strange when separated from one another, and often played a game, a Japanese game, called Kagome, where a group of children would surround one child, the Oni or demon, who sits in the center of the children alone. The others would link arms and begin to move around in a circular manner. When they stop moving, the Oni in the center has to guess who's behind them. The subjects played this game a lot, and experiments continued on. When Hiroshima was bombed, Germany surrendered, and many experiments were shut down. If you travel to Hiroshima now, supposedly in the forest, you might find this old stone building. Inside the building will be this small group of disfigured children and their caretakers. They will ask you if you want to play a game of Kagome. If one were to say no, their doom awaits. If one agrees to play, not much is known of what happens afterwards. Your only way out is to genuinely respond with, "I don't understand." The caretaker will respond, telling you to go back to school, watch the children play, and close the door on the way out.
Russian sleep experiment. Political prisoners who were deemed enemies of the state in World War II were kept awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. The Russian scientists gave them running water, a toilet, books, enough food to last them months, and cots to sleep on but no beds. Their activities, conversations, and oxygen intake were monitored by microphones and windows. Everything was fine for the first 4 days, except that their conversations were beginning to be more about traumatic incidents from their past. By the 5th day, they began to show signs of paranoia, complaining about the circumstances of the experiment and whispering into the microphones. By day 9, the prisoners began screaming sometimes to the top of their lungs. Others were ripping out pages from books and smearing their own feces on it. 3 days later, they were silent. Dead silent. By the 15th day, the test subjects were completely insane. The researchers removed the experimental gas and replaced it with fresh air. But the subjects started to plead and beg to turn the gas back on, as if their lives depended on it. Many inflicted wounds on themselves, tearing out their own organs and muscles. Numerous experiments were performed on the subjects, such as injecting one with 10 times the amount of morphine a human body could take, all while fighting the doctors like a cornered, disease-ridden animal. However, one of the researchers pulled a gun and shot all but one subject. He asked, "What are you?" The subject had said, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher had enough and shot the subject. His last words were, "So nearly free."